family mode.
Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. You are here for OSHPD Engineering Judgments CAN 2-703.3, where we're going to explain the background, interpretation, documentation, and documentation submittal requirements for that CAN when it comes to new buildings, additions, and remodel projects, and how to show compliance with the CAN during plan review and field review. So if you haven't done so already, please feel free to download the handout of this presentation in PDF format under the Go-To Handout section of that toolbox there on the right-hand side of your screen. Again, the presentation is in PDF format, so feel free to download it if you haven't done so already. You are here for a 1 hour to 1.5 hour presentation with a question and answer session at the end. You will all be muted during the presentation, so if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to type in that question into the go-to question box, and we will get to the question at the end of the presentation. So if you have a question again that comes to mind during Nancy's presentation, type it in and we'll get to it at the end. We will also be asking you to raise your hand if you'd like to engage in a dialogue in the go-to panel there. There's a little hand icon next to your name, so click on that icon. We will go ahead and review the list of names and call on you. And when we call on you, we'll ask you to unmute you, and we will unmute your as well, so we can have an open dialogue and hear from you as far as your question and clarification. If you do have a specific question that you'd like to get clarification on about a specific item or a specific project, feel free to email the building standards unit at the regs unit at oshpod.ca.gov email address. Again, that's regsunit@oshpod.ca.gov. If you experience transmission difficulties, please feel free to log off and log back in using the same login information that the go-to software sent you. Again, and we will do the same if the same thing happens to us. We'll log off and log back in. So today for a presenter, we have Nancy Timmons. She is a Chief Fire and Life Safety Officer for the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development. And in the background, we'll have Mr. Richard Tannehill, Architect and Supervisor for the Building Standards Unit as well, answering questions. So Nancy, if you're there, the presentation is all yours.
Thank you, Caesar, and good morning, everybody. Thank you again for joining us for this webinar. I know this update to this CAN has caused confusion, or uncertainties. So the CAN, what we'll go over today is some of the history of the CAN, because it's not new. The CAN's been around for quite some time. There was just a revision that happened last fall that was supposed to clarify the CAN, but has caused additional questions. So we'll go over the requirements for the CAN and dissect that a bit. We'll look at some of the history, why this CAN originally came into place years ago, and the application code requirements for this. And we'll look at documentation, what documentation is needed for the engineering judgments themselves, and then what is needed to submit the EJs and the AMCs online in EPR. And at the very end, I have just a couple of slides that somewhat related topic, but figured this was a good form to bring this up in, is our PIN 67, which is our PIN for fire stopping. We are in the process of updating that PIN, so I'll talk about that a little bit about that update as well. So a little bit of the history again. Why do we have this CAN in the first place? The code allows for engineering judgments in certain situations, and it allows for alternates. So, but it sounds easy, but there's more to it. So we have the CAN to help to explain what, why, and how. And why do we, historically, we would receive, well, I say historically, but now too, we receive multiple engineering judgments that seem to be submitted unnecessarily in plan review. And sometimes that can be just, design professional might be thinking, hey, I needed these last time. I'm just going to put them on the plan review now just in case we need them. Sometimes we get EJs that are submitted when there are tested, listed, approved assemblies that already exist. So why are these problems? And think about the review, the hours of review that can take. So, you submit a plan with 1 or 2 EJs on it. That's not really a big deal. But what we receive are plans with 100, 200 EJs on them. And when a plan reviewer and our staff, when they're looking at listed approved assemblies, they're looking at where this occurs. Does it match with what's on the plans? And are the details in this listed approved system? They're looking through them, but not in great detail, not with the scrutiny that we need to look for engineering judgments, because that system that has been tested, listed, and approved, it's gone through all bells and whistles that it needs to. When you submit an engineering judgment to us, we take on that responsibility of determining, would this system pass the test standards that are required, that are otherwise required. So that's, a great responsibility, and takes a great deal more of detailed review of what's on that engineering judgment. So a lot of hours are added to look at each individual EJ. It's not the same as as reviewing a listed approved system. So hour-wise, a lot of hours there. And then not just for the reviewer, but what about the supervisors, the regional compliance officers? So old school, our old program was logbook, and that took about 30 minutes to input each AMC into logbook. So imagine 200 AMCs that have to be put into the system because the code requires the documentation, right? So you got 200 EJs and AMCs to put into the system. That's 100 hours of work. That's not all that RCO has to do for that week, or that 40-hour week is never 40-hour week, but you certainly don't want it to become a 100-hour weekend on top of your 50, 60, 70-hour week. So anyhow, a lot of time that puts into play here. Obviously, with our new program with EPR, ESP, this is faster, but it still takes some time. And at the time, back when the original CAN was created, there were zero cost ACDs at the time, the change orders, otherwise known as. That was zero cost. Now we have a fee for an ACD. We have fees for the AMC submittal, and we do have a fee for the submittal for the zero cost ACD. And we have AMCs reviewed under time and material, which means every hour, every minute is tracked for the time spent to review these. So we're recouping some of the costs, because if you think about, again, 100, 200 hours of review, at some point we cross this threshold where the reviewer is working for free. That fee wasn't thought of in the fee base for the plan. But anyhow, there's some of the history there. Let's talk about the code part of it. On the left, you'll see old code language, 2013. This is the charging section in 703, which is the section for fire resistance ratings and fire test. I'm not going to read through that whole side, but on the new, quote unquote new, it was new in 2016, but in the new edition, 2016, 2019, the language was changed a bit to make this a little bit clearer. So again, this is the charging section. The CAN is 2-703.3, but we don't start at 3.3. We start at the charging section. So charging section, the scope of this is materials prescribed herein for fire resistance shall conform to the requirements of this chapter. Fire resistance ratings. The fire resistance ratings of building elements, components, or assemblies shall be determined in accordance with the test procedures set forth in ASTM 119 or UL 263, or in accordance with 703.3. So there's that's where it leads you to 703.3. So the charging section is saying that for building elements, they shall be tested in accordance with the standards of ASTM 119 or UL 263, or with the options given in 703.3. It then continues on to say the fire resistance rating of penetrations and fire resistant joint systems shall be determined in accordance with 714 and 715 respectively. So you go, if you've got penetrations that you're looking at, you go to 714 for the requirements, and then joints, you go to 715 for the requirements. Not here. 703.3 is for the building elements. Whoops. So again, the CAN 2-703.3, Here's the link on our site where you can find that can, and the revised version is from the latest was September 21st of last fall. So I included this picture because, of course, of fire. So it's fun to burn things, right? So this is just a picture of one of the chambers that you put an assembly in, and that's where they burn it, so to speak, and test it. But anyhow, so now we had that the charging section led us to 703.3. So what does 703.3 say? Methods for determining fire resistance. The application of any of the methods listed in this section shall be based on the fire exposure and acceptance criteria specified in ASTME 119 or UL 263. The required fire resistance of a building element, component, or assembly shall be permitted to be established by any of the following methods or procedures. So again, charging section that we read before this said that the building elements are tested per ASTME 119 UL 263. This section is saying, okay, you have these other options, but they are still these options. You still have to base these other options off of the standards ASTME 119 UL 263, and then goes on, or what are these other options? So you have 1 through 6, and we won't focus too much on 1, 2, 3, or 6. Pretty self-explanatory. But I'll still go through them quickly. So number 1 is the fire resistance design documented in approved sources. 2, we go to chapter 721 for prescriptive design. So some people forget that 721 and 722 exist. So don't forget to look at those. You might have your answer in those sections. So look at 721 for prescriptive and 722 for calculations. And then number 6, fire resistant design certified by an approved agency. An example of that is if you've seen on our site our OSHPD pre-approved details. That's an example of that. What we're going to focus on today is our numbers 4 and 5. So number 4 states engineering analysis based on comparison of building element, component, or assembly designs having fire resistance ratings as determined by test procedures set forth in ASTME 119 UL 263. So what this is saying, charging section says, original charging section, building elements tested per, I know you said this 5 times already, but I'm going to keep saying it. The building elements tested per ASTME 119 UL 263, or one of the options in 7033. Number 4 is saying that you can have an engineering judgment, so that you have an EJ for a building element that has not been tested and listed per ASTME 119 UL 263, but you present this engineering judgment that has criteria based off of these testing standards. This number 4 is saying you can have an engineering judgment based off of those testing standards, but they don't have their own test and listed system yet. And then number 5, the alternative protection methods as allowed by 10411. So 4 is saying you can have an EJ for the building element. 5 is saying you can have an alternate. So we'll dissect this a little bit. What's a building element? A fundamental, and this is from chapter 2, a fundamental component of building construction listed in table 601, which may or may not be a fire resistance rate of construction and is constructed of materials based on the building type of construction. So you go to table 601. This is the easiest way to determine what is a building element. You can have an EJ for a building element without an AMC, because number 4 said you can have an EJ for this, but it's an EJ for building element. The building elements are listed here: your primary structural frame, bearing and non-bearing interior and exterior walls, floor construction and associated secondary members, and roof construction and associated secondary members. Those are your building elements. So again, if you don't have a listed approved assembly, you don't have a listed approved assembly, so you're going to use an engineering judgment for your building element. Number 4 allows you to have an engineering judgment for your building element, and if the engineering judgment that's submitted is based off of the test standards of ASTME 119 UL 263, then you wouldn't need an AMC for that, because the code says you can do that. And again, I'm just reiterating that a little bit more. here. So again, that's number 4. Number 5, where it says you can have an alternate. An alternates, number 5 says an alternative protection method as allowed by 10411. So this means an EJ is based off of any other test standard. So not based off of ASTME 119 or UL 263, but another standard. This is an alternate. What some people don't seem to realize is that the code allows for alternates, but you'll see this in the commentary if you have the commentary, but this was meant, an allowance for alternates was meant for technologies not currently in the code. It was not meant for companies to use EJs based off of assemblies tested and paid for by other companies. This is just, if any of you have been involved in the code writing process, it's long. It's very, very long. So new technologies and new assemblies are being created and approved every day, but it takes 3+ years to get the new code in. So again, alternates are meant for new technologies that are not currently in the code. And if you continue on through reading through 104.11, it'll indicate what's needed for the research reports, what's needed for test. And then, of course, if you're familiar with the code, there's a matching section in the admin code, CAC, the admin code 7-104 that also allows for the alternates. And as the name would indicate, you have an alternate, then is an AMC needed? Yes, an AMC is the alternate method of compliance. So you will need an AMC. So what are some of these other components that you might have EJs for that are not building elements? You might have an EJ for joints, curtain walls, head of wall. They have their own test procedures. ASTME 1966, UL 2079, and then for smoke, also UL 2079. So joints have their own testing requirements. And the joints, they're between the assemblies. So again, your building elements, your floor ceiling assembly, your roof ceiling assembly, the exterior or interior bearing walls, those are the assemblies. The joints are between them. They have their own tests. If you have an EJ for these, then you will need an AMC for these. And you can see this part here, if not tested and listed, then the AMC is required for that. Oops, went too fast there. Same with penetrations. Penetrations have their own testing requirements and their own test standards. Through penetrations, it's ASTME 814 and UL 1479, and again for the smoke, it's UL 1479. Membrane penetrations are tested similarly. With the code has additional allowances for membrane penetrations, but they're tested the same. So again, if you have an EJ for penetrations or membrane penetrations, you will most likely need an AMC for that EJ. There are some systems that are tested with the assembly. So if you've got a joint or a penetration that component that's tested as part of the building element assembly, that furnace picture that I showed you before, that whole, what's being proposed for your project is being, that, I want to say that better, how it's being constructed is tested. It's tested as it's being constructed. Excuse me, I have some stumbling blocks there in my brain to mouth transmission. It's tested as that assembly. Then you may not need an AMC, but most of the time these components are tested separately to their own standard. So that probably made it more confusing. Well, I'll go to the summary in a minute. That'll help clear it up. What you need for plan review, the EJs and the supporting documentation are required to be on the plans. They're construction documents, so that information has to be on the plans, the EJs and the supporting documents. That's the same for whether it's the information is being reviewed in the field or it's being reviewed in the office. The EJ and the supporting documentation have to be on the plans. And then in the field, so now you're in the field, your plans have been approved in the office. Now they're on the field side of it, and it's determined that an EJ is needed and it's a change in the approved documents and the approved construction documents. So what's required when you have a change in approved construction documents? It's required to be documented the changes of work are required to be documented per an amended construction document, an ACD. So what this last piece of the can is indicating is that when you have engineering judgments that are materially altering, they're changing what has been approved on the approved plans. It needs to be documented, on the ACD. If you have multiple EJs, the multiple EJs can be on one ACD. So each EJ is going to have their own AMC, and each EJ and their supporting documentation is going to be on the plans on the ACD. But what this is saying is that multiple EJs and their AMCs can be submitted as a single ACD. Now, this gets confusing to some people. Some read this as that they can submit multiple EJs on one AMC. That's not what this is saying. Each EJ has its own AMC. We'll get into that in more detail in a little bit. But essentially, each EJ has its own AMC. Multiple EJs can be on a single ACD. Just like in plan review, if you submitted the plan to the office and you had 50 pages of EJs and the supporting documentation, those are multiple EJs on a plan. This is saying the same thing. You can do that on the ACD. So for a summary of when an AMC is needed along with the EJ, on the left is when you need an AMC along with the EJ, when you need both sets of documents. So all EJs that are not in compliance with item 4 of 7033 shall be submitted for review and approval in accordance with 7-104, which is the section that says you can have alternates, and those alternates have to be documented via the AMC. So all EJs that are not in compliance with item 4 of 7033 need an AMC. All EJs for penetrations and or joint systems that don't have their own tested listed system require an AMC. And then other EJs submitted for non-building elements, this stuff in table 601, that do not have their own tested listed AMC also require an AMC. So when is an AMC not required with the EJ, it's for on the right here, all EJs that are in compliance with item 4 of 7033 do not need an AMC. So again, those are the EJs based off of test procedures set forth in ASTM E119 UL 263 for the building elements listed in 601. If you have that in place and that's what your EJ is for, then you don't need an AMC. The others, you need an AMC with your EJ. So move on to a little bit about the homework part of this, because as you can tell, this puts part of this reason for having this can too is to put the ownership back on the design professional to determine, does a listed approved assembly or system exist? This should not be the responsibility of the OSHPD plan reviewer to determine. They'll check and see what is proposed, and we do have some staff members that I think have the whole UL, this is old school, but the whole volume of the UL assemblies memorized, but that's not everyone. But they will check these to see, but it's the design professional record to do that homework and determine if a listed approved system works. So how do you do some of that homework? These are just a couple of sites. There are more, but there's a couple of sites to look at. One is Intertech, the other is UL. UL has changed their site. I say recently, but I don't know how recent that is. But I've scrolled through this, and it is much, much, much more user friendly to find these systems. So I'm not going to read through the next several slides. Have just snippets, little screenshots of their site. I'm not going to read through every single one of these, but just to give you an idea, when you go to the link that I have here, scroll down it's a long page. Scroll down this long page, click on some of these links here, there's a lot of helpful information here. And as example, on the beginning part, it'll talk about different fire tests and definitions. The general portion, there's metric dimensions, loading of test specimens, coating materials. And as you can see, each of these has a related link to it. There's floor ceilings and roof ceilings. Are they concrete? Is it steel floor and form units? There's metallic electrical boxes, all kinds of information. And if you click on these, it'll lead you to listed approved assemblies that have to do with the design that you have in place. There's information for beams and columns, walls and partitions. And then the numbering system is also on this page, the UL numbering system. Like if at the top of this here, I'm not sure if you can read it, but floor ceilings, it's A or B, concrete and cellular steel floor, C's glazing system. So, and then you go through those columns and rows. And again, look at what do you have? What's your assembly that you're looking at? What do you have? What materials is it made out of? Click on these links for what matches, and you'll see listed approved assemblies. There's thousands and thousands of them. And of course, more for roof, ceiling, beams, walls, partitions, columns, etc. So this is a really, really helpful page, helpful links here. Please do look at that when you're doing your homework to see if a listed approved system exists. So scrolling further down on that page, they've got definitions for all kinds of things, bats and blankets, what's a code authority, what's the combination fire smoke damper, prefabricated building columns. There's, again, tons of information. So please look through that when you're looking for your, to see if your condition has a listed approved assembly. And then Intertech is also very user-friendly. You put in the information that you have. You don't have to fill in each one of these. If you know the listing category, use the toggle down, look at what you have there. If you know the company, look at that. It'll come once you find what you're looking for, so to speak. It'll come up with, all right, what's the test standard? Yep, here's this system for a rated ceiling assembly in this example, and it was tested per ASTM 119. They put it right there for you. What's the rating? And that information is there. So these are a couple of sites. When you're dealing with existing construction and remodels, there are a couple of other additional resources. The one on the left is the whole title of it, Guidelines on Fire Ratings of Archaic Materials and Assemblies, and that's an IEBC chapter resource, A. And they consider archaic construction to be prior to 1950, which I always say, I think that's so rude, that's not archaic. But anyways, there's information in there about, you've got construction, pre-1950 construction and conditions, and helps to figure out, all right, well, if I got lath and plaster and it's this thickness and however many layers, what would that equivalency be to today, and what hourly rating? What do I need if I'm adding, gyp to this now? How do I merge these together? It gives some information there. The one on the right is Harmathy's Rules, 10 Rules of Fire Endurance Rating, and that's an ICC publication. That it also helps to determine, you're looking at your existing construction and what is the rating of it, because it's not listed in code. Well, how do you determine the rating? It'll help guide you through that and figure out what your rating is, so that you can better piece together what you need to combine it with the new. We have two sections for documentation. This first section for documentation, we're going to talk about the actual engineering judgment and the AMC. The second portion will talk about how to submit that in the EPR program. So this section we've talked about already. I just haven't read. I'm not going to read this whole thing through you, but this is the section from the admin code that allows for alternates. And when I highlighted some of the words here, you'll see that it's very singular. This is not plural. This is very singular. An alternate is allowed, provided written approval for the alternate is given, a written approval a written request shall be submitted to the office with an alternate method. The written request shall include sustaining evidence in support of the alternate, very singular there. A request approved by the office shall be limited to the specific request and shall not be construed as establishing a precedent for any other future request. So it's very clear in the admin code. It's singular. You're allowed to submit for an alternate. A written request is required. Documentation is required to say that a request was approved, and it's specific to the condition at hand. It's not for every project you have from here on after. So with that, how many AMs and number of EJs per AMC? How many EJs can you have on an AMC? Generally speaking, you're going to have one AMC per EJ. And of course, as if you've gone to any of our presentations or heard us speak, there's always a depends, right? So can you have multiple EJs on one AMC? Maybe. Is EJs that are based on the same existing tested listed system that are comparable in application or covers equivalent conditions may be combined into a single AMC. So you're presenting an EJ, and you always have to give what system is it based off of. So you're presenting an EJ, it's based off of this listed system, and now you've got another EJ, it's based off the same exact system, and it's the same conditions. It's a 1 hour fire barrier, similar material of, a conduit penetration, for example. Then you could have multiples, but again, it's going to be one AMC per EJ unless this EJ is based off of the same existing tested listed system with comparable application. So what needs to be on the EJ? This is straight from our CAN. So we often get EJs that are about, a page or so with limited information on it. Remember, when the reviewer's looking at the EJ, the reviewer has to determine if what's being proposed would pass the test that it otherwise would have gone through. So they need details on this. So first, the EJ shall be prepared and signed by the manufacturer's qualified technical personnel, or the registered professional engineer or fire protection engineer, or an approved independent testing agency that provides listing services for fire stop systems in concurrence with the manufacturer. The EJ is based on the existing tested listed system that is comparable in application or covers equivalent conditions. So again, you're submitting an EJ, and the EJs are based off of a listed approved system. And then the EJ has to give the reasonable performance expectations for the fire resistive system for specific application. The individual preparing this shall be knowledgeable regarding the elements of construction to be protected, the probable behavior of that construction, and the recommended system protecting it. The EJ shall apply only to specific conditions and configurations for which it was produced and shall be based upon reasonable performance expectations for the recommended fire resistance rated system for the specific application. You may have had an EJ on a previous project that you think is going to be fairly comparable to the one you have now. Make sure it's specific to the project at hand. The EJ shall be in a narrative format that clearly describes all aspects of the design, including but not limited to the hourly rating, the complete description of all critical elements of the fire resistive system configuration, any non-standard conditions, and clear directions for installation of recommended system and fire resistive designs that the EJ is based on. Again, these are construction documents. The individuals that are putting this together need to know what it looks like and what they're doing. And then detailed drawings to clearly illustrate the assembly and where it occurs. This is something we've been noticing that isn't always included. We've got an EJ, you've got the AMC, and the supporting documentation, but doesn't indicate where in the building this occurs. Make sure to include on the plans where, EJ 701 is referenced on page A102 at reference line, whatever. Show us where it occurs so we can make sure that it fits the required application. And then the EJ shall clearly state the recommended system is an EJ and not a listed system. Again, puts that ownership on the design professional of record, that they've looked, it does not exist, and that's why we need this EJ. And then the basics of the EJ shall indicate the facility name, the address, the title of the project, and the OSHPD project number, and shall include the issuer's name, the title, the address, telephone number, and signature. Oops. This is an example, just one sample of the supporting documentation, and this is one page. There was more documentation to this, but in looking at this sample, they'll see a narrative up top. What is the condition that's at hand, and why does it not match a listed approved system? That's Italian in me. I throw before everything. So what's the reference system? What's it based off of, and why does it not match that referenced listed system? Is it, an 1.5 inch annular space is permitted on the listed approved system, but you've got 2? What's the difference, so that the reviewer doesn't have to search for this forever? What is your condition? What portion of it, what is the listed system that it's based off of, and what portion of that listed system does it not comply with, or that there's a difference between the two? Indicate that in the narrative. It makes the review go much faster. And again, this is just an example. And we already went over this about what needs to be documented plan review wise. Again, EJs and their supporting documents on the plans. And then if it's in the field and an ACD is required, those EJs and their supporting documents can be on, multiples can be on the ACD. I'm going to backtrack just for a minute. When I talked about an AMC for each EJ and having to be specific for the project, we are looking at having facilities have their own pre-approved details, kind of like I said with on the OSHPD site, we have pre-approved details for conditions that just are going to come up. Your hole in the floor assembly for your toilet or your sink, or those types of items on our pages. But what we're also looking at is, say you're working on a facility that has a building from 1952 and an addition, and throughout this project, or not just project, but you have several projects where you're going to work at the space between the 1952 and the newer addition. So the condition in the 1952 building, the condition in the new building, and you're probably going to have similar conditions where you're going to need EJs for any project that you have at this intersection. So we're looking at the facility-specific pre-approved details where I've got this lath plaster system, this much thickness along my 52 building, and I've got gyp and whatever else on my new addition. And I have these EJs that I have these conditions that I know I'm going to need EJs for anytime I touch this wall. Then we're looking at having the facilities submit those to us. We can pre-approve those details, and you can use those for multiple projects. So if you've got a facility like that and you want to explore that route, just talk to us. We can help you through that. All right, so now the documentation submittal on EPR or ESP. We'll find on our site for ESP and Excella, there are user guides. So if you get to the page, the links are here. You get to the page for the user guide, scroll down to 6A for applications for AMCs. And that'll take you through the steps that are needed to submit the AMC along with your EJ. There's a new feature in this that as you're submitting the information, you cannot submit, you cannot do that final submittal unless the supporting documents are uploaded into this on that link. So it won't let you continue on unless you submit your supporting documentation. We put that in there purposefully because we get EJs and then we have AMCs and we don't have supporting documentation. That doesn't save you any time at all. It might get you to submit it faster, but what is the reviewer going to review without the supporting documentation? So then you just got to send it back and start all over again. So now this system will force you, so to speak, to submit the supporting documentation along with the AMC submittal for the EJ. It's self-explanatory through that. These are the last two slides I was talking about that are related to our PIN 67 changes. Again, that is in the process of being published, the new revision. And what PIN 67 is our PIN that says, the code requires special inspectors for fire stopping. And the PIN indicated what training was needed or is needed to be a special inspector for fire stopping. When we put this into place, when we had the PIN in place 3, 4, or 5 years ago, the training that was offered to code-based was through UL and FM, and that training was more specific to selecting a listed approved assembly as opposed to inspecting or installing that. Or inspecting it, excuse me. So that wasn't sufficient. So we had criteria in place for, all right, if you're going to be a special inspector for fire stopping, what training has to be in place. So the PIN indicated what training had to be in place. What we had hoped at that time was that additional training would come about through different entities, and that has. So several years ago, I got on a committee with ICC and to create new training for fire stopping, and that has now been published with a month or two ago, maybe a month ago. Their new training criteria for special inspectors has been published, and because of that, we're able to change our PIN. So what hasn't changed is that the special inspector is either going to be conducting inspections for an approved inspection agency and have specific training, or is going to be a hospital IOR, A, B, or C, and have this specific training. What's changed is the actual training. So what is needed now, again, to be a special inspector, they're either going to be with this agency or an IOR, A, B, or C, and this certificate of learning achievement issued through ICC. When you go to ICC on their certificate of learning achievement page, scroll down to fire stopping, you'll see the criteria that is in place to have that training. So our old PIN, we had the Intertech training, we had IFC training, and we had 4 product manufacturers training, and the special inspector would need one of those based off of what type of project they were working on. We got rid of the Intertech portion within the last year or so. We hadn't changed our PIN to update that only because we thought this ICC training was coming out sooner. Besides Intertech, the other training was IFC. That hasn't gone to waste. So if you go to the ICC site and look at the CLA, the Credential of Learning Achievement page, you'll see that what training is needed. There are 2 tracks, A and B, I think they call it that, or 1 and 2, whatever it is on ICC. There are 2 tracks. And if an individual comes to the table with the UL or FM training that's meant more for just selecting a system, then they'll have to pick the track that has 8 modules. If an individual comes to the table with that in IFC training that we were requiring, they come to the table with that training, or UL has a new training that they also created for special inspecting in the past couple of years. If they come to the table with either one of those, they'll pick those individuals will pick the 4 module class. So they'll have a shorter class to take. So if you've got the IFC training, that's good. You can take the lesser lesser modules to four. I think it's four modules. So it hasn't gone to waste. It still will be helpful. But anyhow, our pin will change to show these changes, and it's now all based on the ICC Certificate of Learning Achievement. And again, go to that site, go to ICC's site, and look at what is required for the type of training that you're going to need. And again, it's based off of what you come to the table with. But anyhow, just wanted to throw that out there that revision is coming, and the training is a lot more broad now because there are more opportunities, more options. And that is it for the presentation, so we can move on to questions. And I will let Caesar and Richard start that process.
All right, thank you for that, Nancy. That was a great presentation. I want to go ahead and encourage those who are here and haven't done so already and would like to ask a question and participate in the dialogue to raise your hand by clicking the hand icon next to your name in the go-to panel. We have several individuals who have done so already, so we're going to go ahead and call on you here soon. So I want to give everybody an opportunity to do that. So Nancy will be on the call still to answer those questions as we move forward. So Nancy, the first question for you was typed into the go-to question box, and the question reads: if a manufacturer does not have a specific UL test for a specific penetration, but another manufacturer does, can an EJ be submitted for the first manufacturer, or do you have to use a manufacturer that does have the UL test?
So thank you for that. You would use the manufacturer that has the test. If a listed approved system exists, that's to be used.
Perfect. We do have more questions, so keep those questions coming. The next question is, hi, the no AMC needed column on the right of the last slide mentioned EJ. Can you elaborate on that, Mr. Mark? I'm going to go ahead and call on you. I did notice that you have your hand raised and you have a couple of questions that you asked, so I'm going to take this opportunity. Yes.
See, he continued on the next box. The next two.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so the entire question reads, hi, the no AMC needed column on the right of the last slide mentioned EJs based off test procedures set forth in ASTM E119/UL263 does include or exclude through penetrations ASTM E814/UL1478 and construction joints ASTM E1966/UL2079.
Okay, so I moved back to that slide. I think are you able to see that slide right now, Caesar?
Yes, summary? We are.
Okay, so this slide again is talking about when an AMC is needed along with the engineering judgment. So when the AMC is not needed with the engineering judgment, it's when the engineering judgment for building elements, the table 601 items, are submitted, and those EJs are based off of the test standards of ASTM E119/UL263. They don't have their own, they didn't go through the test, ASTM E119 or UL263. They didn't go through those tests or have their own listed approved system, but the EJ that's submitted is based off of the requirements of those test procedures, and it's for building elements. Then it would not need an AMC. The joints, the penetrations, they have their own testing requirements. Those are not part of number 4. Those are alternates for number 5. Those would need the AMC along with the EJ. Oops.
Perfect. Thank you, Nancy, for that. Mandy, I see you have your hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you can unmute yourself, Mandy, we'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Nancy. That was really helpful. I just had a quick question. If you could elaborate a little bit more on the review process of an AMC. I know I've issued a couple in the last couple months, and I know it's, you know, they either get approved or approved with comments or denied, but there's not really there's not like a back check like we get with, you know, issuance of plans or anything like that. So I'm just wondering if there's a protocol that OSHPD's putting into play that allows us to do some type of back check or anything during that AMC process.
Thank you, Mandy. So yes, you're correct. The AMCs don't have the back check. It's like you said, it's either approved or denied or approved with comments. But what we've been telling our staff is if it's something minor, say it would otherwise be denied because it didn't have, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a reasonable example. All right, so the EJ was submitted with the AMC and a listed approved system number was given, but not the actual documentation from that the listed approved system. The reviewer can call and say, you know, hey, this wasn't submitted as part of this AMC, this EJ, please send me an email with this listed approved system to it. I mean, something like that. I mean, that may not be the best example, but we've been telling them if it's something that can be taken care of easily through a phone call and a clarification in an email, then go ahead and call that design professional and ask for that additional information. If that reviewer is going to need to re-review everything because of whatever information is missing, then it's just to return it, deny it, and have them resubmit it. But if it's something minor that can be taken care of with a phone call or a simple answering of questions, we have them call the design professional and ask for that missing information.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you, Mandy, for raising your hand. We're going to go ahead and read off a question off of the typed in questions. Nancy, this question is for you. The question reads, if EJs for head of wall or EOS are known and unavoidable during design, structural deflection or elements, etc., can those EJs be submitted with a permit set of documents without an AMC?
So, no, those would still need an AMC. And yes, you can submit them in the plans, but they would still need an AMC because the head of wall is a joint system, not a building element. So that would need the AMC to go with that EJ.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
If it's known, maybe that's part of the other half of the question is, if it's known that you're going to need the EJs, yes, submit those on the plans. But yes, they still need their own AMC. Sometimes what we see is just EJs submitted just in case, that they don't know if they're going to need them, but they put them in there just in case. And that's that additional review time that you want to avoid. And with the modeling systems that are in place now, it should be, somewhat easy to determine if you're going to need that EJ in this case. And if you're going to need it, submit it. But yes, it would need an AMC in that scenario because it's not a building element. The head wall is a joint system.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. Cheryl, I see you have your hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you can unmute yourself, Cheryl, we'd like to hear from you.
Good morning, Nancy. This is Cheryl. My question for you is in regards to something you stated about the EJs. In the EJ process, you said that either the manufacturer, the testing agency, or the fire protection engineer need to sign drawings. There are times, however, that as the MEOR, I have had to overstamp that. Am I just overstamping the AMC portion of it, or do I also need to add my stamp to that? Can you help me understand when a fire protection engineer versus a MEOR should be stamping the drawing or the EJ? And we're talking, EJs and AMCs.
Okay, thanks, Cheryl. So for the EJ submittal, the person preparing it would need to sign it. They may not have a stamp, like say it's a person that the the company has trained, they've gone through their own special training to say, okay, you're capable of creating EJs, and they may not have an engineering stamp, but they would, they sign whatever the work that they're creating, they're signing. And then if it is somebody that has a stamp, like a fire protection engineer, they can stamp it too. But yes, the design professional would need to overstamp those pages with the EJs.
So overstamp the EJs, not just the AMCs. So both.
Yes, however, the AMC is a form the actual AMC is a standalone form. When I say standalone, I mean that, well, maybe it's not a right word to call it, but when you submit the AMC portion, that is a form that's filled out on the EPR or ESP site. So that's submitted, and I think there's a spot at the bottom of it for the design professional to sign. But the engineering judgments and their supporting documents that are actually on the plans have to be on the plans on stamped pages.
I guess I'm saying that, okay. So okay. I think I get what you're saying. So even if it's not, so every EJ and AMC has to go on a plan, is what you're saying. That has been overstamped by the MEOR or EEOR if the case is it's electrical.
It's the maybe I'm not understanding yours correctly, but yes, the documents on the plans would have to have those plans would be stamped by the design professional of record, or if it's an engineer, those pages would be stamped. The EJ would be signed by the actual page of the So if you have your plans and you've got one page, like A710, and A710 is your page that has all the EJs on it. Each EJ on that plan will be signed by whomever prepared it. And then that page, that A710 is going to be stamped by that design professional record.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. It's just, there's times of confusion of MEOR versus the fire protection engineer. So I thought I'd ask. Thank you.
You're welcome. And that too, with fire protection engineer, that they may stamp and sign the EJ, but that's different than the pages, the plan pages. So that's a whole other topic, but the two different things. Like if you had a project that was, and again, this is talking about EJs right now, just talking about stamping, but if you had a project that was a fire alarm project and a standalone fire alarm project, and the electrical engineer would be stamping those pages, but not a fire protection engineer alone. I shouldn't even go into this because it's a much longer conversation. But two different things is what if talking about an FPE can stamp the engineering judgment, but could not stamp the page that the plan review page that those engineering judgments were on. I don't know if that made it more confusing or less confusing, but it basically, whoever's preparing the engineering judgment has to sign it. If they have a stamp, they can stamp it, but the page that it's on for plan review is stamped by the DPOR.
Yeah, that's correct. And just for the record, the engineer does not have to sign the AMC because the architect or whoever's the DPOR can sign this. Just submit the AMC itself.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Hope that was a good explanation. Hope that answers your question. We have another question that was typed into the go-to question box, and the question reads, for incremental projects, can an EJ be used across multiple increments?
So, oops, sorry. Sorry about that. Yes, if it's the same condition. So I know that happens sometimes where you've got this one condition but it shows up on multiple increments, even though it's one spot, it shows up on multiple increments, just because of the nature of the project. And that's okay. Same spot, same condition, same listed system that it's based off of, that is okay. It's, and if that, hopefully that helps answer, because that happens often where, increment 3 and increment 4 cross over each other. If, your shell and core and your build outs will start to cross over each other later on in review. And it's the same exact information, just a different increment, that's fine. That makes sense there.
Great, thank you. I want to go back to the raised hand. Philip, we see you have your hand raised, so if you can, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you can unmute yourself, Philip. Philip, are you there? All right. I guess he's not. I'm going to go ahead and put your hand down. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise it again. Stephen, if you're there, I see that you have your hand raised. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you can unmute yourself, Stephen.
Great. Hi. Thanks. I also have a typed question too, so you can disregard that after I ask. So my question was, what sort of supporting documentation is necessary or beneficial to provide with the AMC application? A good example would be, I just got a EJ from Hilti. They did not provide a narrative on this, so I would have to provide my own narrative. So it would be on a separate, document other than the actual EJ. So I want to make sure that that's acceptable or okay, and then also find out what other supporting documentation is expected.
Thank you, Stephen. So I would suggest if you're, if you're getting this EJ from Hilti, you're paying them to do that, right? So they should be giving the information that's needed. If you're comfortable saying, here's the condition I have and why it doesn't meet this listed approved system, you can certainly add that narrative. I would suggest that the individuals preparing the EJ for you include that in their part of their work. That should be what they are doing. Okay. But that would be my recommendation, is that they do that. They're saying that this is why it doesn't work. You can if you want, but you're paying them to do that, have them do that. And then these pages here that with the EJ preparation, all of this information is part of that supporting documentation. So again, like you mentioned, the narrative, why do we need this EJ? What is the system it's based off of? What is the expectation, the performance expectation, an hour, 2 hours, smoke, what are the requirements that you're trying to meet? And just again, all this information here, where it occurs. So if you're submitting an EJ with AMC and you have a reference sheet showing where it's located for the plan review, all that kind of information that's in these 3 slides here, that would be the supporting documentation. And then the listed approved systems that it's based off of. You have the numbers of those systems, but it's helpful to include, and again, that we can be reasonable with that too, but helpful to include those sheets with the details on them.
Okay. And then I guess if I had a kind of quick follow-up questions, I know, so the application for the AMC and the EJ provided with that is step 1. And then once that's approved, then that approved EJ goes on to an ACD. So when submitting the AMC, do I still put it on one of the sheets, put it on in the drawing set sheet and just submit it as if I were submitting for the construction documents? Or do I just upload the EJ just as a freestanding PDF? That makes sense?
Yeah, and this is the part that I think in time we'll probably find better ways to do this with it, documentation that way. But the EJ, and Richard, I know we've talked about this before too, and your memory might serve better than mine, but the EJ and the AMC, or excuse me, documentation on the plans, if you're asking,
AMCs typically have to be submitted independently because they are tracked to the system independently.
Mm-hmm.
So you're asking, do we submit
so they
those?
can put them on the plans, but they're not going to be approved until the AMC is approved.
Okay. And then keeping that, how do you keep those documents organized? Always have, I would say, recommend always having the reference of whatever AMC you have for which EJ. Just make sure the EJ number is listed on that AMC as well. Yeah.
And then what you'll probably get is a comment that says, won't be approved until after the AMC is approved. That way it carries through.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Great teamwork. Want to go ahead and ask the next typed in question, Nancy. The question reads, who can determine if multiple EJs can be submitted under a single AMC?
So again, that's going to be if the, sorry to scroll through this quickly here. So a general rule of thumb is just might as well put it in your mind that one AMC is needed per one EJ. The only time that it wouldn't be is if you have multiple EJs that are based off the same exact listed system, tested listed system, and the conditions are exactly the same, then you can have multiple EJs. So 9 times out of 10, you're going to have an individual AMC with each EJ. So only if you've got an EJ based off of, I don't know any number you want to give, but again, a listed approved system, just one system. And that one EJ or those 2 EJs are based off of that one system, and the application and the conditions are the same type of wall. It's a fire barrier, not a fire smoke barrier or a fire partition. It's the same type of wall or the same type of floor assembly, and it's based off of the same listed system, and it's the same type of conduit material. Then you could have multiple EJs on one AMC.
So when you say EJ, are you talking about the individual details or separate EJs? Because you can have a lot of details to one EJ, correct? A lot of conditions.
So so EJ, you're going to have your EJ and you're going to have an AMC, and your EJ is going to have it's going to be based off a listed approved system. So you've got a second EJ now that's based off of that same listed approved system, and the locations, through the type of assembly are the same. The one system is it's based off that same one system. Then you can have the multiples, but it's more often than not it's going to be one for one.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, perfect. Next question, Nancy. The question is regarding 104.11. If we are considering building system, vacuum, and plumbing that may be used on different projects, what is the best way to organize or strategize an AMC?
I'm sorry, can you repeat something? I didn't get the part about you vacuuming. What did you say?
Yeah, so the question reads, regarding 104.11, if we are considering building system, like a vacuum plumbing, that may be used on different projects, what is the best way to organize or strategize an AMC?
I'm not understanding that question.
All right.
I think they're talking about carrying it over to multiple projects, in which case you need individual EJs or you do a product pre-approval.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, like Richard said, if it's carried from another project, you need its own AMC, its own EJ, or yeah, if it's site specific, good. Like we talked about with certain facilities, when I brought the example of like the 1952 building adjacent to a new, and you're doing work along those walls, and you're going to have the same conditions over and over again. Submit for pre-approved details for us to look at, but otherwise, yeah, they're specific for the individual project.
Perfect. The next question we have here is still on EJs, and it reads: when is an EJ required to be stamped by an FPE as opposed to just being signed by the manufacturer's technical representative?
Okay, so in the CAN that talks about the I don't think it's here. I think it's further down. Sorry, scroll through that like that. So it depends on who's doing that, who's preparing that work. So if the company has determined that they've got this set of 10 individuals that have gone through their company specific training and therefore qualifies them to prepare EJs, then if that company says they're qualified to do it, then they're qualified. Those people can sign it. If they indicate only a fire protection engineer can do these, then they are the ones that sign it. So it depends on how that company's trained their individuals and what they're doing. So we used to have lists from some of the companies that they had their qualified individuals. For a time being, we were getting these EJs just signed by whoever, could have been the salesperson. So the salesperson wasn't specifically trained, so that wouldn't be acceptable. So we started reaching out to these companies saying, all right, who of your staff are trained to prepare these EJs? And they would give us a list, and we probably need to get an updated version of those, but it's, who did the company train to do it, or who did they hire to do it? If they hired an FPE to do it, then that person's preparing it, then that FPE signs it. If it's if they've trained some of their own staff to be able to create these, then that staff has to be part of that list that says they're trained and qualified, and they could sign them.
Great, thank you. I want to take this opportunity to recognize that I see a couple of hands raised, but I don't see any audio on your end. So if you can make sure that your audio is on, if you'd still like to participate in the dialogue, please ensure that's on so we can call on you and we can unmute you so you can unmute yourself. The next question that we have here, Nancy, is when is an ICC Fire Stop CLA required for remodel projects, and when is that starting?
So that training, as soon as this PIN is published, I mean, you can start it now, but as soon as that PIN is published, that will be the training implementation. So it'll be, our original PIN had some allowances for types of projects, like, a brand new building or a remodel of a suite or, remodel of a room or space. Our old PIN had those qualifiers on there just because we needed something in place, but we were trying to be reasonable as well for individuals who may only have projects that might be a SNF, a skilled nursing facility that just had, little room remodels here and there, as opposed to somebody who's working on a brand new tower. So we had some variances in there just to be more reasonable, but this now that this is in place for ICC, it's just more of a blanket across the board. So if you're doing special inspecting, then you have that training that ICC offers, regardless of what project you're on or what size project you're on.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. Just want to remind everyone, we have about 15 minutes left in the presentation. So if we don't get to your question, please send your question in an email to regsunit@oshpod.ca.gov. Again, that's regsunit@oshpod.ca.gov. So Fred, I see you have your hand raised. I'd like to call on you. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you can unmute yourself, Fred.
Thank you. My question is locations for these fire stopping details. What about like sometimes you open up a wall and you have MC that has to be relocated and reworked and you're going to be outside of the locations. Can there be notes in there that these fire stopping details can be used in other locations?
So, thanks, Fred. So if you mean, you think it's going to be at, you're in the same room, and you think it's going to be at this spot on the wall, but then when you open it up, it's a foot over or 2 feet over or whatever, but it's the same condition you thought you'd have in the first place, that's okay. But if it's, I'm working on this room and next, 3 months from now, I'm going to be working on this other room, that wouldn't be okay. That's basically like a different project. But yeah, if you mean your exact location was just off by a little bit, but the condition's the same, that would be okay. But if it's different project, different scenario, different room, then it would need its own EJ.
Well, sometimes it's just a different room. That would be, an adjacent room close by, but not in the same room. MCs can be ran through walls, around corners.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's, if it's that scope, I don't know exactly where you were going with that, but if it's the same project, the same scope of work, same, the same condition you thought you'd have in the first place, is just not in the exact location. Again, that's okay, but it's a whole different project, or it's the same project, different room, then no, it would need its own AMC, or excuse me, its own.
I think he's asking if it's this same project, but maybe 3 rooms down, same exact conditions. Can that be ACD'd to work in that place?
So that one would go to if it's same exact condition and where we're talking about multiple EJs on one AMC, only being permitted if it's the same exact listed system, based off the same listed system and the same conditions, that could fall under that.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you, Fred. Next question we have for you, Nancy, is do AMCs or EJs have a target timeline with OSHPD for review? For example, 15 days or 30 days?
I thought we had I don't remember the turnover for that. I think I might be thinking of something else, but I don't believe so. That's something I should know. But it's not we try to get them through quickly. Like I know when we get a lot once it's been in the field, and once this is part of an ACD that's in the field, they talk to your field person first if it's in the field, and they're usually familiar with the condition and the scenarios, and they can look at those and get them out more quickly than if it were to go to the office. So if you do have EJs that are submitted as ACDs in the field, talk with your field personnel first to see that they can review them, and if they've got they should be able to. They have the time to do that, assuming it's not 100 EJs. But if it's field, do that first. If it's plan review, it'll go through the regular processes of, the timing it takes with plan review. Our supervisors are pushing the EJs and the AMCs to be reviewed when they're submitted individually like that, to be reviewed faster. So I guess it's not a blanket answer, because it depends on what process you're in. Are you in the original submittal with plan review that's going to the office, or is it an ACD that's part of the field? It's going to depend on those conditions too.
Great, thank you, Nancy. We have another question here that was typed in. The question reads, if an engineer submits an EJ for a system you are confident there is an approved UL for, do you provide the UL or request engineer to do the legwork and provide?
The engineer should be doing that legwork. If a reviewer's confident that exists, then they could give a helpful hint if they know that it's there, but just don't rely on them to find it for you. That's the design professional's responsibility. But yeah, some of them, like I mentioned, that we have some staff that I think have the whole volume, all the volumes memorized. But if they know it, then it should be easy enough for them to say, hey, take a look at, system blah, blah, blah. And does this match your condition? I think that would be reasonable for them to do. I just, again, don't have that expectation. That the expectation should be more on doing the homework.
Great, thank you. We have a hand raised from Edward. I see that he's unmuted himself, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Edward, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is just regarding some gray areas in Chapter 7 where there's a performance solution versus a tested solution. So, for example, if you have a fire barrier wall intersecting a non-rated exterior wall, or you have a fire barrier intersecting like a non-rated horizontal assembly, or for example, even if you have like a perimeter joint where you have vision glass to the floor, in all those instances, you don't have a tested solution. You have really performance requirements. So you're still going to have an EJ from the manufacturer to meet those performance requirements, but are those typically going to be an AMC, or is that handled in a different way? Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. Those situations that you mentioned at the curtain wall, at those types of areas, those are joints. Those would need the AMC with the EJ.
Great. Thanks, Nancy. We have 8 minutes left, so we'll try to get through these as fast as we can. So the next question reads, does the Intertech Qualified Fire Inspector designation have any special bearing for OSHPD projects, or is it mandatory, or is it nice to have?
So Intertech, as I mentioned, and thank you for the question, Intertech is no longer a requirement. So that was there in place in the beginning, but over the last year or so, we've done away with the Intertech portion. We've kept the IFC portion. So no, they don't need to have the Intertech anymore. So don't take any more time or money going through that one. If again, go through the ICC CLA site, and if Intertech is an option on their site and you want to keep it for that, in addition to the CLA training, that's fine. But it seems to me to be easier to do one of the other options. I shouldn't say that. I can't recommend companies or anything like that. But since most of our special inspectors have already had the IFC anyhow, have the IFC plus that CLA training and just maintain that. But Intertech, no, we don't need to have the Intertech portion for OSHPD any longer.
All right. Next question reads, would an EJ be required if our fire stop condition is slightly different than OSHPD OPD fire resistive detail FR 1.33 in terms of exterior finish material?
So thank you for that. So yeah, just like any listed approved system, if the condition that you have doesn't match the listing exactly, then you would need an EJ for the portions that don't match.
Perfect. Great. Thank you for that. Next question we have here reads, regarding the manufacturer's qualified technical personnel, is that fully at the discretion of the manufacturer? Does OSHPD recognize the International Fire Stop Council's guidelines for issuing engineering judgments?
So what we've generally done is reached out to the manufacturers and look at we're talking about the engineering judgment preparation. right now as opposed to fire stopping, I'm assuming. So engineering judgment wise, we have reached out to manufacturers and looked at what is their training criteria for the people that they're saying are qualified to prepare these. We do look at that. As I mentioned, we have some that just have they have anyone that's employed by them sign it, like their salespeople, and if that's the case, and they say, yeah, well, our salespeople are cross trained. Okay, well, just show us that and show us that training for that. And I think there was a second part of that question. The second half of that question, IFC, what was that portion?
Yeah, the second part of the question is, does OSHPD recognize the International Fire Stop Council's guidelines for issuing engineering judgments?
We can definitely look at those. Our CAN pretty much spells out what we need for our engineering judgments for OSHPD.
Perfect. We have two more typed in questions, and then we'll go to the raised hands. We have on the EJ preparation slide, it says EJ shall be signed by 3 different parties. Please clarify. All 3 are required or only one?
Yeah, it can be only one. So these are examples. So again, if it's the company, the manufacturers had their personnel sent through training and that's their qualified personnel, it can be signed by that person. If they send it out to an FPE, it could be signed, stamped by that person. So this is or it doesn't have to be all of them. These are examples of who's qualified.
Perfect. This question that was typed in deals with the TIO. The question reads, do persons who prepare and sign the EJs need to be listed on the TIO?
They're not. No, they're not. It depends who's doing the testing for the condition at hand. So you've got an individual that prepares the EJ, but in a different agency is going to be out there doing the testing, then those would be 2 different entities. If it's the same agency doing the EJ that's doing the testing, then be listed for the testing, but they're kind of, I don't want to say completely separate, but they're separate but related issues. So it depends on who is doing the testing.
Perfect. We see that, John, you have your hand raised. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you can unmute yourself. John, we'd like to hear from you.
Yes, just a very quick question. We have a large tower project that has some EJs for through penetrations, basically for L ratings at smoke barriers. And those EJs are going to be used at multiple locations, hundreds, thousands of locations throughout the tower. Is the expectation that each individual penetration would be mapped in identifying the locations where the EJ would be used, or is a generic typical detail sufficient?
Thank you for that. So you're saying that you have a tower that you have multiple locations that you have systems that you don't have an L rating for an illicit system?
The idea is that an EJ will establish the anticipated L rating for a through penetration assembly. This is healthy.
So it would depend on if you're saying thousands of locations. Is it the exact same type of penetration through the exact same type of assembly? Would be the first thing.
Yes.
Okay. And then you're certain that no listed approved assembly works or system works, because again, if Hilti might not have it, but does 3M or does STI or does another entity have a listed system? So those would be the things to verify first.
Yes, it would seem implausible that this wouldn't exist, but we're just being presented with this claim. But in principle, if you're going to use, the same assembly in multiple locations where the conditions are identical? Is it necessary to map each location, or if you're working off a typical detail that's used multiple locations, just reference the EJ in the typical detail and then you're okay?
Yeah, it seems reasonable where you could do that if it's clear where those penetrations are happening, just like in a just like you would with a lifted system, you would have a similar generic detail or typical detail.
Okay, that addresses my concern, and I would emphasize that we will be not trying to slip it in on some different type of partition or whatever. Just that it's where this really occurs, then use this EJ.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Want to go ahead and thank everybody for participating in the webinar. We hope that you found it informational and useful. I do want to acknowledge that we did see some hands that were raised, but did not recognize any sort of audio on your end. So if you do have a question, feel free to send us an email at regsunit@oshpod.ca.gov. Again, that's REGSUNIT at oshpod.ca.gov if you have a specific question for a specific project, or if you feel your question did not get answered today. For future information, we have up and coming, we have a CAN 2-108 dealing with temporary utilities, which is due to be released, and the release date is not has not yet been determined. And we also have a presentation on OSHPD 3 clinics. So if you are interested or know someone who is interested in attending that, feel free to share the information with them. Be sure to log in and subscribe for future presentations and notifications by going to our website, www.oshpd.ca.gov. On the upper right-hand corner of the website, click subscribe, and then provide your name, email address, and what areas you'd like notifications from. For example, if you want to know more about building safety and finance, design and construction, et cetera, et cetera. So with that being said, until next time, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for doing your part in providing access to safe, quality healthcare environments throughout California. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.